Alright guys, here we go with another video, and we're starting to get serious now. We're gonna make arrows. We're gonna pull some numbers out of our bow. We're gonna shake them up pretty well and come up with the numbers that we need to choose the perfect arrows for our bow. This is the archery series, and this is arrow making video number 1. We're gonna understand arrow spine rating and choose the perfect arrows for our bow. Arrow making videos are gonna be a little bit more complex, put a little bit more of an effort into them, be patient and you'll understand them, and that's gonna be a big step forward on your path to become a professional archer and bow technician. So get serious, follow the video up to the end, and I promise you that you will get the knowledge that makes the difference between an amateur and a pro. So, static arrow spine, what is it? It is just how much a 28-inch arrow bends under a weight of 1.94 pounds. The arrow is just put on two supports 28 inches apart from each other, and then in the middle a weight of 1.94 pounds is applied and the amount of bend is measured. To be very exact and professional, the arrow needs to be 29 inches long, and it's gotta stick out of the supports, so half an inch of each side. You apply 1.94 pound and you measure how much it bends from the straight position to the deepest of its curve. This measure in thousandths of an inch is the arrow spine. If the arrow bends 0.4 inches, the spine of the arrow will be 400. So do you need to buy a spine tester and measure your arrow spine? Not at all, of course. You just need to understand that the smaller the deflection, the smaller will be the spine rating, the stiffer the arrow will be. On the other side, an arrow that bends more is gonna have a higher spine, and that means that the arrow is gonna be less stiff. So a 300 spine arrow only bends 0.3 inches under 1.94 pound, and it's a pretty stiff arrow. A 500 spine arrow instead, it bends half an inch after the same weight, and that's gonna be a pretty weak arrow. Now that's the definition of static spine, which is the best approximation that we can get of the dynamic spine, which is the actual flexion of the arrow on your bow, which is almost impossible to measure because variables are almost infinite. The concept that you need to grasp is that on a bow there is no weight attached to the arrow. The arrow is gonna just be squeezed by the pressure of the string pushing the arrow out of the bow, and the inertia of the tip of the arrow, which is where the most weight of the arrow is concentrated, and there's two pressures on both ends of the arrow that are gonna flex the arrow. That's the famous archer paradox, which the great Merida is gonna demonstrate for us, and which is indispensable. An arrow to fly straight is gotta flex when it's pushed by the string. Either it flexes sideways, which is the case of the finger release, or vertically, which is the case with the mechanic release. Important is that the arrow bends just enough, not too much, not too little, to fly straight out of the bow. So once we know how much pressure is applied on the back of the arrow and how much is the weight of our tip, we can just go and choose our arrows, and they're gonna be perfect for our bow and shooting style. So a big applause for Princess Merida, and let's start pulling some numbers out of our bow. This is the EASTON spine chart, and will work with all EASTON arrows. If you're using another maker, download their spine chart. And as you can see, the first information we need is the ATA rated speed of our bow, which is a spec given for every bow by the manufacturer, but you need to understand what that means. This represents, or should represent, the speed of the arrow right out of your bow, which, to cut it short, you'll never know unless you have a chronograph, because the IBO, International Bowhunting Organization speed rating, it's given for every bow at a peak draw weight of 80 pounds, draw length of 30 inches, and an arrow of 400 grains, which is the lightest arrow that you can shoot at 80 pounds. The ATA, Archery Trade Association rating, it's a little bit more fair, at a draw weight of 70 pounds, draw length of 30 inches, and an arrow yet 350 grain, which is the lightest arrow that you can shoot at 70 pounds. Those are just numbers that bow makers, manufacturers put out there to compete against each other on how fast their bows are, and to have people buy the bow because they see crazy speed that you never get out of your bow. My bow, for example, is rated 332 feet per second IBO. I'm shooting a 65 pound 20-inch draw length. I'd be happy if I get 290 feet per second out of the bow. So you need to choose your arrow out of a good approximation of what your actual speed could be. We'll see how to do that, but right now let's start writing down some numbers about our bow. My bow is rated 332 feet per second IBO. I'm gonna write down that speed. Next piece of information I need from my bow is the peak draw weight. We did it a million times throughout our videos, so as easy as get the bow on the draw board, connect the scale, pull a full draw and record the peak draw weight. If you don't have a draw board, just use a hand draw scale. And let's write down this second piece of information, 65.4 peak draw weight. Now let's go have a look at the bottom part of the chart where the adjustment for each specific bow setup are. First is the adjustment for the bow speed, the actual bow speed. As you can see, if you are below 300 feet per second, take away 5 pounds from your peak draw weight. If you are between 300 and 340 feet per second, no adjustment. Above 340 feet per second, add 5 pounds to your peak draw weight. We said we are a 65.4 pound draw weight with only 28-inch draw length, so our speed is very likely to be below 300 feet per second, 290 very likely, so we're gonna adjust our actual speed to a range that goes between 285 and 305. We're gonna be in that range, and the adjusted draw weight, which we're only gonna use to choose the arrow spine, between 60.4 and 65.4. No other adjustment needed because mechanical release, of course, we're gonna use. Inserts, they're gonna be below 25 grams and our point is gonna be 100 grams. We're gonna discuss all this in the next video when we are going to explain the total weight of the arrow that we need for our bow. So back to our chart, we're gonna consider both rows, the 62 to 66 pound draw weight and the one above, 57 to 61. And the last piece of information we need to choose our arrows is the arrow length. So let's go see how to find out how long our arrow needs to be. With the bow full draw, knock a shaft and mark the arrow right on top of the arrow rest. If you don't have a draw board, just draw the bow with a shaft in and have somebody mark the arrow on top of the rest for you. Measure from the throat of the knock to our mark, the arrow rest mark, and add 1 inch. That's gonna be our minimum arrow length. We have 25.5, so minimum arrow length 26.5. And the arrow length range to choose our spine, we consider from 26.5 to 28.5, 2 inches more, just to have enough range to play with the front of center, which we're gonna see in the next videos. Back to our arrow chart, we're gonna consider 27, 28 and 29 inches length, and we're gonna stay right in the middle of that, 28. And as you can see, we can choose between 300 and 400 spine and we're still pretty fine. We're gonna choose the 400 spine, the weakest arrow. The reason for that we're gonna explain in the next video, where we're gonna explain how to choose the right arrow weight for our arrows to get the maximum speed out of our bow. So don't go buy your arrows just yet. Stay tuned, next video is coming out soon. You'll understand GPI, GPP and total arrow weight. And as usual, like the video, but most important, subscribe to the channel to help it grow.